So my name is Aidan Gilligan from Ireland, but living and working in Belgium. And I'm part of the INGSA Planning Committee and one of the founders of INGSA. And I also have a science diplomacy firm based in Brussels called SciCom, Making Sense of Science. Before that, I worked for 10 years in the science diplomacy section of the European Commission. And before that, I worked in the office of the Chief Science Advisor of the Irish government. It's okay? So basically, we succeeded in getting one session on the program about industry, which might sound a bit strange when the topic of the conference is SDGs. And today we have 4 people from industry giving a perspective on how we can advance the SDGs through industrial science. The backstory to this is that inside INGSA, we've kind of realized that industry is never really there other than being sponsors. And somehow industry is the necessary evil in the room. And it's very difficult to engage industry due to lots of constraints in the policy sector, transparency rules and so on. So what we've done is we started in Toulouse in July. We had a meeting with the Chambers of Commerce of France, and we started a dialogue on how we can better engage industry in the policymaking cycle. And the plan is we will run a series of workshops around the world as INGSA over the next 2 years, and we will present a study at INGSA2018 in Montreal. So today the topic they've given us that we actually haven't inputted on is the role of the private sector in advancing the SDGs, implications for science advice. I'll just read really quickly what we've been tasked to answer as a group today. So the statement is that governmental and multilateral organizations often step in to lead when there is a market failure. In the case of the SDGs, such leadership is essential to kickstart the movement and ensure coordinated commitments. But is it a case of true market failure? Traditional firms in every sector are increasingly seeing for themselves that socially inclusive and environmentally sound actions are simply good business, while entrepreneurs are seeing opportunities in following public sentiment toward the SDGs. What opportunities are there for firms to lead? Are partnerships with government sufficient? How to ensure compatibility between the needs of industry and the SDGs? What is missing? What could be improved? And what is the role of industry? So what we've decided to do as a panel, we kind of have 2 good cops and 2 bad cops. We've got Airbus, which everybody knows, our favorite airline in Europe, in the world, yes, exactly. And we've got artificial intelligence data collection company. They're the 2 good cops. And then on the other side, we've got a really nasty investment banker, and we've got a chemical company. So we're going to have fun today. But as the 4 together have decided, they're going to look at issues of responsibility, integrity, independence, and accountability. And above all, what we're trying to get across in the session is basically how does industrial science, how is it relevant to politics, policy, and power? So what we've seen at the conference is a lot of talking, but not much on implementation science, and not much on actually what industry is doing towards achieving the SDGs. So just to give you 2 stats before we hand over to our first speaker, depending on who you believe, the estimates are that it's between $2.5 and $12 trillion per year. That's what it's going to cost to reach the SDGs. And in terms of jobs, that means 380 million new jobs. So what's not spoken about, perhaps at this conference and in general, is that it is a real big fist fight over who's going to get this money. Will it be the climatologists in Europe versus the climatologists in America, the reinsurance companies, and so on? So we'll have some presentations looking at the financial pillars around the SDGs. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to our first speaker, which is Dr. Cyrille Schwob, who's Head of Technology at the Airbus Group in Asia Pacific. Cyrille.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm gladly taking the good cop role, and I will show you how Airbus, as a company, we believe that we are in a changing world and that we have the tools that are going to help us to move towards something a bit more sustainable, which is going to be good as well for the society and the companies. We are going to have together some sort of a more sustainable and profitable type of environment. So I will start with something very beautiful to start with. How the technology, what we are going to bring to the world, is going to help integrate and bring the sustainable world we are all looking for. I was in the Smart City panel this morning, and I heard one figure, which is most of the battle for sustainability is going to be battled inside the city, because we all know that 2/3 of the population is living in cities, and we all want our cities to look like that. And Airbus, we are accompanying this movement, and we are trying to bring the third element to the city mobility, the third dimension, the air. And you see, we've been working in the past few years on some beautiful projects, developing the technologies that are going to be needed for this. But Airbus, as an integrator, we are very well aware that this is not going to be something that is only an Airbus project. It is something that needs to be integrated with the urban planning. It is something that needs to be integrated with some plans for how you integrate all this data that is going to be generated and what are the policies that are coming with it. I'm going to show you a second example. Aerospace, always in this very optimistic point of view. We've been at the forefront of technologies for the last 100 years. We are the one who brings the GPS technologies, the accelerometers, all these technologies that are commodities now and are helping our lives every day. These are things that have been originated in aerospace. And we continue to push this with the technologies I was just flashing on the previous slide. And what we have in mind is if you want to stay at the forefront of technology, you need to have a constant inflow of new talents, especially in the STEM area, in the science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And to do so, in this new digital era, you need to be able to reach to every single person and to be on every single media that can be done. We have a lot of initiative on this topic. I just select one of the most recent one because it's beautiful. I need to put this beautiful picture of someone taking his own picture and putting some sort of Snapchat filter on it. It's a new initiative, Discovery Space, to help us to reach the younger generation people, to make sure that they have some sort of tools available to them to enact, to make real whatever they have in mind for the aerospace of tomorrow, and also to make sure that they will be getting on board of the aerospace journey in the future, and we need these kind of talents in the future. So this is the optimistic environment. Why we are moving toward this direction? Airbus is very conscious, self-aware, that we are in a world that is moving very fast, and it's moving for the good. Like you see, we have the society in general is more and more inclined to take on board in their own thinking that a company is not about just making money, it's about making an impact on the society. So you have some figures here from the Deloitte Millennial Survey. 86% of the younger ones believe the organization success is not only money, it's what do you do for the society. Not only the millennials, the young ones, even the investors, they start to think not only in terms of financial, but how you contribute to the society. And a very famous example is this letter that Larry Fink sent to all the CEOs, saying he will be only supporting the companies that have a sense of purpose for the society. We see, thanks to this kind of assembly, that there is a more stronger will from the government to expect some responsibility from the multinational. Airbus is part of one. And it's not only for the company itself, but also for the whole supply chain and the ecosystem that the company is spearheading for a company like Airbus. And then, very close to the company itself, even the own employee of a company, they want to be motivated, they want to feel that they are serving a greater purpose. If we take the example of Airbus, they want to feel that they are contributing to saving the environment for the future, creating the mobility and the cities I was showing in the few slides before. So the answer for Airbus to this changing world has been very more than 15 years back. In 2030, we started to engage in engaging with the UN on signing some charters on how we can work in a more ethical world. And we have created what we call the Airbus Responsibility and Sustainability Charter. I do apologize for my French English. Some words are harder than the others. And we promote with this some responsible business practices, again, like as I was emphasizing, inside the company, but not only the company, in the company and its ecosystem and the value chain that is behind Airbus. And through this responsibility charter, we are addressing all the most important challenges for the society, and we have put this action in the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals to give some framework to it. What I want to highlight here is not something just for marketing. Huh? It's something that is ingrained now in what we call our values. So what you see values, this is the culture of the company, and it's every single employee is now very well convinced that this kind of responsibility and sustainability is actually not a marketing thing nice to have, but it's something that is here to support the bottom line of the company for the next 30 years. If this is not here, this will be damageable for the company later. So we've done like many other people do. We selected in the SDGs that were available the ones that make sense for the company. So you will be seeing, as I was saying already, quality education is part of it. Gender equality, because with a company 150,000 workforce, this is clearly contribution, maximizing the contribution of people is something important for us. A decent work environment, industry innovation, and it's part of what I really want to highlight later because of my background. Responsible consumption and production, we produce more efficiently, basically. Climate action, we take into account how we can protect the planet in the future. Contribute to peace, justice, and strong institution, and partnership for the goals. Recently, we had some partnership signed with the Doctors Without Borders and this kind of organization. So we are not alone in this journey. A few examples in how we support the SDGs within our responsibility and sustainability charter. We support employee sustainable initiative. Practically what it means, you have some internal innovation competition, and when you support whatever ideas the employee can bring to the table. One very interesting thing that is supporting our discussion today, last year I saw a proposal for an employee which was to clean the air using the aircraft. While you tour around an airport, for example, you just use the aircraft as a giant Dyson vacuum cleaner, and you clean the air at the same time. This is the kind of idea that can come out of the employees from Airbus. Huh? We work towards attracting the young towards the aerospace environment, but not only. We support education for the youth in all the countries in which we are involved. We work strongly to ensure that women in the company we have equal opportunities, and we have some open line type of system to make sure everything that can be reported if any suspicious behavior happen. And I will finish by, we are supporting with technologies how we can ensure the sustainability of the planet in the long term. I just see, I skip this one, humanitarian and disaster relief. Of course, a lot of the Airbus product that we have can support relief in painful time. A typical example is what happened in Indonesia recently, twice in a row. And one of our products, the F400M, is able to deliver large quantity of prime necessity devices, just like excavators or this kind of thing that you need massive transportation. So we put this at disposal. So more into details now. What I want to do is show you some tools of how the Airbus technology community can support the SDG implementation. And I try to frame it a bit like in one of the sessions I saw this morning, where you have knowledge, local contributions, and at the national level, and then at the international level. And if we go at the very knowledge base, Airbus, like any big company, but actually more than 2/3 of the knowledge in the world will be deposited in companies. We have some specific knowledge that can be useful in designing the future. I put two examples here. The first one is urban mobility again. It's by nature a cross-dimensional type of thinking, and we need the expertise of Airbus to get things flying in a congested environment, how you monitor them, how you integrate them in the airspace, how you certify and make the rules for them to fly safely. All these kind of things is Airbus expertise. And we bring this to collaborative type of projects. So I take the example here, it's a picture from the European website. We are leading one initiative, the Urban Air Mobility Initiative in the European framework, integrating not only Airbus, but other industries, the cities that are going to take the challenge with us, SMEs, banks also to understand how the financing of this will happen. Second example, which is pretty interesting, is the SDG. It's a nice policy, and a policy, you need to be able to monitor it, and a lot of it you can actually monitor from space. And a typical example is pollution control, or how you make sure that you monitor that people are using the best practice available as of today to minimize the impact of agriculture, for example. Second example is you go one step higher, and we work at the national level. And I'm taking an example. I'm very happy because I had one of my colleagues in this environment, which was Cyrille this morning in the panel. And we have designed with him and the help of his organization, MITE in Malaysia, a typical public-private partnership. So it's a research center which is aligning the interests of the government, the industries and the academia in Malaysia to try to push forward the knowledge in aerospace technologies in this ecosystem. What we have in mind and what is very specific about this particular setup in Malaysia is we were not looking at increasing the profitability or the technology content of one single company, but we have been looking from the beginning as a whole ecosystem to make sure that collectively the whole thing is more efficient. A typical example is providing visibility through the complete supply chain, from Airbus to local leaders like Spirit in Malaysia, going to CTRM and other companies below in the supply chain, to make sure that you reduce the level of inventory in between, and you increase the overall efficiency of the supply chain. So it's one way of interacting at the national level, making sure that the taxpayer money is involved in something that is actually going to produce competitiveness increase, going to increase the digital infrastructure in the country, and something that is a collective effort, not something for just one company, but the whole ecosystem. The last example will be at the global stage. So we were talking about sustainability impact. We all know that aviation is a growing economy, a growing part of the economy, and the traffic and the number of airplanes is going to double. It has been doubling every 15 years, actually. So it's going to double again in the next 15 years. And we all can imagine that this will have an impact on the planet. Aircraft are emitting some CO2 emission, for example, and other things. Just a small point on this one. We all know that aircraft are emitting, but the CO2 emission of the whole aviation industry is only 2% of the overall human production of CO2. So it's not as big as an impact as we may think. Nonetheless, the aviation industry, not only Airbus, the aviation industry as a whole has taken some commitments, and the most striking one is neutral carbon growth by 2020, and 50% reduction in the nasty things that can come out of aviation by 2050. So these are commitments that were not imposed by government or whatever. It's something from the aviation industry itself, again, understanding that responsibility and sustainability is part of the bottom line of the company and the future growth potential for the company. And to answer this, again, it's not a one solution type of thing. You need technology, you need some infrastructure that are more efficient, you need to improve and optimize the operations to minimize the waste of resources. And at some point, you need also some sort of policy market-based measure to make sure that there is some control on how much CO2 is evolved and some sort of bonus, malus type of system. Again, policy is one thing. You need to make sure that it's actually implemented for real. It's not only, like Cyrille was saying this morning, the proof is in the pudding, so you need to actually do it. And what we've been doing for quite some time now at Airbus is working on locally understanding how these kind of policies, which were not even here at the time, can be implemented, and what would be the impact on the economy, what would be the impact on the local production of sustainable fuel, for example. And we've been working with airlines to make sure for the technical feasibility, with technology providers to actually produce some sustainable fuel, and with policymakers to understand how to integrate locally and make sure there is no competition for food, for example, if you produce sustainable fuel. I need to hurry up a bit. I had some very specific example, so from a global go to some local projects, some of them involving flying sustainable fuel, some of them reducing the noise around the airports to enable this kind of sustainable city again in the future. Some of them around recycling aircraft also, because more aircraft, it means at some point they will be retiring and you need to recycle them and make the best use of it. And then I will finish on, again, this beautiful picture. Because for me, this is why I work for Airbus. I really believe we can have an impact on how our life is going to be lived in the future. And what we see is a typical environment where you will have not only access to mobility on demand, but you imagine also the whole city completely integrated, where you have a delivery of what you want at the time you want, equal opportunity for everybody, access to data, this kind of things. Voilà, so this is my call. Let's define the future together.
So what we will do is we will have the presentations and then bring everybody up for questions. So next up we have Royston, who's going to probably provoke us a little bit more into action, from what I understand from his presentation.
Thanks, Ed. It's not easy being a bad cop, but it's also not easy doing a session post-lunch. So let's try and do, hopefully, two difficult ones become an easy one. But it's a pleasure being here. The bad cop, I think, is a good cop if he's keeping you away from the bad guys. So I think the intention really is to be bad for those who are using SDGs as a license to talk and not as a license to act. And I think that's really the focus over the last 2 days, to make sure that we are moving together. This is a slide that all are familiar with, but I think the line on the top really talks about the financial need to be able to make this happen, to be able to get the SDGs to move, to be able to move to action. How much is it going to cost us? Where is this funding going to come from? And what is really the way forward to be able to get there? I want to take us back a few years. And I think it's interesting and important for us to look at the MDGs. No one has mentioned Millennium Development Goals over the last 36 hours. And I wonder why. And probably because there are people feel it's not a great success. And as researchers in science and technology, doesn't it make sense for us to check, probably, is there something that went wrong there that we need to learn from? And therefore, we need to look at, are we going to do the same things again, which we did for MDGs, and land up in the same place where we were after the MDGs had their time out? And therefore, for me, the importance of being able to do something different is critical. We cannot rely on government alone. The need to bring in a concert of all actors, whether it's government, whether it's private sector, whether it's academia, whether it's science and technology, whether it's private wealth, whether it's philanthropic capital, all of these need to come together in concert to be able to do this, for which I have selected or suggested an approach. It's a difficult set of 5 words to remember, INGSA. That's a funny acronym, so I don't know how you're going to remember that one, but try and figure it out. The impact investing, no one left behind, governance and policy, systemic change, and authenticity. I think if we are able to bring these 5 elements together, whatever is the strategy, whatever is the region, whatever is the geography, I think we have a winning way forward to be able to make that difference. So let's go one by one. Impact investing clearly is a new paradigm. Whichever way you look at it, whether you talk about the trillions of dollars needed to meet the SDGs, we're seeing a continuum develop. Earlier, there were just 2 pockets, the philanthropic funding, no returns expected, and the private equity, mainstream capital markets, capital, commercial returns first. And what we're seeing now is the evolution of a continuum. And you can take your pick on that continuum and still be part of the impact investing sector. You can look at impact only, you can look at returns only, or you can look at anything in that continuum to try and find out where that is. My colleague from Airbus talked about Larry Fink's letter to the Black Rock employees, where he said every single investment dollar that we put out, we will use a lens of sustainability to look at that investing. So we're clearly seeing big names across the board, BlackRock, BNP, Goldman, everyone's, yesterday we heard Hitachi, we're going to see Sumitomo later today. Everyone's looking at how do we bring investment dollar to look at impact investing. And therefore, this is the only slide I'm going to talk about ourselves, because I think this is much larger than just one entity. It's about all of us working together. But we decided that how do we really support bringing capital to the impact space? And my dream is to create a capital with a conscience ecosystem. So 12 years ago, using Grameen's brand and the Nobel Peace Prize of bringing people out of poverty, we launched the world's first social investment bank. Last year, we launched a social debt company. Hopefully, in the next couple of years, a social equity fund, and then a social stock exchange. We think we need to build out the whole ecosystem so that we can get funding into projects that are really supporting in people who are working at the bottom of the pyramid and the SDGs. In India today, I chair the Indian Microfinance Network. We have 30 million clients. All 30 million are women, and all 30 million women are below the poverty line. And that really is a demonstration of how a private initiative can be able to find a gap that probably governments and policy and others have been able to struggle with and create a sustainable solution. The other one of leaving no one behind. And I came up with this picture at about 2 o'clock this morning. Many sakes down, I think. I don't know. But I realized that it's important for us to take the message of what's happening globally. So whether you see the American elections, and those of you who are interested, the House seems to be going to the Democrats and the Senate stays with the Republicans. But either which way, there seems to be a move against exclusion. If people are finding that they are out of the mainstream, then they're going to vote with their voice or with their feet, or probably worse still, with anger. And therefore, we cannot afford to leave anyone behind. Whether you're a corporate, whether you're in the private sector, or whether you're a government, exclusion, whether you're in Latin America or in Austria or Poland, and we're seeing that move all across the world, that excluded populations today are standing up and being much more vocal than we can ever expect. And so the need to leave no one behind is as much a business need as it is a government need. And if you look at some business statistics, we can see clearly that those who are using the SDGs as part of their global goals seem to be doing much better in terms of their returns. Everywhere, 6x probably of returns are coming from that number. The point Aidan talked about, the 380 million jobs that are going to get created if people are focused on the SDGs. Let's move to the next one. And to my mind, this is probably the single most important one in the context of science and technology. How are we advising, how are we supporting policy initiatives through research to say, what is the role that government needs to play? Because the government needs to be a big-time cheerleader. Today, we seem to be sitting on opposite sides, and the government says, when industry fails, I'll step in, and private sector saying, I'm going to criticize government. But it'll never work that way. It's a concert, and each one has their own symphony part to play for it to truly be magical and musical. And therefore, the government needs to foster that culture of innovation that's looking at being inclusive, the ability to build policy around data privacy. And we heard yesterday the discussions around AI and machine learning and blockchain and cryptocurrency, and the fact that vulnerable populations could really fall prey. While this could be great and supportive to them, this could also be a double-edged sword that could really hurt them badly. So how do we create policies that are supportive, policies that respect the privacy, and policies that protect those who are vulnerable? And finally, creating this right ecosystem, that everyone has a stage and everyone's part of that symphony, and creating space for people to learn from those at the bottom of the pyramid. We seem to be specializing in being able to talk down and give policies and recommendations, but how many are really listening to the poorest of the poor, listening to see what really works for them, and how can we create something that makes sense for everybody? And therefore, we come to the need for systemic change. It's literally, the power is in our hands. The fact that 800 million mobile phones in India are with the poorest and with the excluded population. How do we use that mix? How do we bring affordable education, livelihoods, healthcare, and a whole lot of other pieces of the puzzle that work for people at the bottom of the pyramid? The ability for us to realize the now is possible. And that's why yesterday I was a little frustrated listening to some of the sessions, because everyone seemed to talk about, in the future, this is what science can do. In the future, technology can do this. And it's not about the future, it's about the now. It's about people today that are suffering, that people today that are creating social unrest in our people because they are unable to be included in the mainstream. And the power of technology can make that future now. How do we make sure that today we can get 400 million people out of poverty because of the mobile penetration we have? How do we use AI and ML and blockchain and other things that we have in IoT to be able to bring these people into the mainstream now? And therefore, I think this fourth revolution is a huge opportunity. Speaking at a science and technology conference, speaking in GRIPS, which is really doing research, as you mentioned, at the bottom of the pyramid, how we bring these tools to bear to be able to support. And if we see some of the data, we've seen really what are the corporates doing in this space? Are they really authentic? Are they really just what I like to call picking up the SDGs that suit their value chain and sort of doing it more cosmetically? And we're seeing that in the data. If you see the PwC SDG reporting challenge, the data seems to indicate that there are some companies that are very clearly different from what the citizens are wanting. The people want something else, the companies are doing something else, which worries me because we came to that stage a few years ago where we saw greenwashing, then we saw impact washing, and are we going to see tomorrow SDG washing? Put the sticker, they have great colors, put them on the balance sheet, and everyone says, wow, we're in it, we're doing SDG. But the reality is, who is really checking the impact? Everyone knows the 17 goals. How many know the 169 indicators? How many know really each of the sub-indicators that are going to make the real difference? The goals are going to do nothing. It's about the indicators that are really going to make people come out of poverty and really do something useful. And therefore, we're seeing the move from input funding to outcome funding. We're seeing the move from let's set up a school, let's build a hospital, to saying, how do we fund for those who are educated? How do we fund when X percentage stay in school? How do we fund when mortality rates fall by X percent? Very specific funding of outcomes. And I genuinely believe, and we are trying to do the world's first blockchain-enabled impact bond. And anyone's interested, we can talk later. Or looking at impact bonds that are focused on certain outcomes. But I think that's the role that corporates and private sector need to play. How do you bring market to support policy and government? I think that's the point Airbus made. How do we bring everyone together to be able to come in? We're seeing some examples from Unilever, from Shell. There are some in the room, Sumitomo and others, who are going to be sharing what they're doing to be able to get there. But I think it's not about the big companies. It starts with each one of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. So next up, we have Ken Yamaguchi, who is a senior manager with CDP Worldwide, which I understand is data analytics and artificial intelligence, who again is going to talk a little bit about financial SDGs.
Yeah, thank you very much for introduction, Aidan. I'm Ken Yamaguchi from CDP Japan. Let me talk about the trend seen in current CDP reports in conjunction with the SDGs. Oops. Oh, opposite. Yes. So CDP is a global reporting system, UK-based NPO. Over 6,000 companies reported environment data to CDP last year. More than 600 world leading investors supporting our activities, and also like more than 115 large corporations supporting our CDP supply chain programs. We have 3 questionnaires. One is climate change, and another water securities, and forest commodities. Climate change questionnaire is a fully coordinate with the TCFD recommendation. TCFD is a task force for the climate-related financial disclosure, come from the G20s. And also like a water securities questionnaires have a concept of the water accounting. Forest questionnaires cover the 4 commodities: timber, palm oil, cattle products, and soy, which have a significant impact in the deforestation in the world. And now we have over 8,000 responses across 90 countries, which covers more than 50% of the total listed global capital, market capitals. We believe the disclosure is the most important, and all necessary changes can start from the disclosure. And there's two ways to encourage the company to respond to CDP. One is investor scheme, showing the upside of this slide. On back of the request from investors, we send an environment questionnaire to companies. We realize that the so-called power of the capitals and total asset of 650 investor is circa 87 trillion US dollars. Last year, we received about 2,300 responses in the climate change, 700 in water, 200 forest commodities under this scheme. The other scheme is supply chain. Some of the global big procurers, such as Walmart, joined as a CDP supply chain program. On behalf of these members, CDP send our questionnaire to their suppliers. Now 115 big procurers are participating in this program. The total purchasing power of these members is said to be 3.5 trillion US dollars. So through this scheme, we received almost 5,000 responses in climate change and 1,600 in water, 90 in the forest last year. In terms of number of the responses, supply chain has more impact than the investor scheme. So we can say that the purchasing power is more powerful than the investor money. So go to the SDGs. Yeah, our questionnaire is highly linked to the SDGs goals and targets. The goal number is all like described in each CDP questions. Oh, sorry. And our water security questionnaires are linked to the SDG 6, and SDGs 7, 9, 12 are linked to our climate change questionnaire, particularly regarding the renewable energy and other energy usage. And SDG 13, climate change itself, and SDGs 15 are linked to our forest questionnaire regarding deforestation. CDP data are used to monitor the progress and development of these goals and targets. Needless to say, no goal in SDGs can be achieved without corporate actions. Recently, corporations are playing key roles in advancing SDGs and also Paris Agreement, women business, and all other major environment initiatives. As Aidan mentioned in the beginning, the World Business Council of Sustainable Development estimated the business value of SDGs would be 12 trillion US dollars per year and create 380 million jobs. So apparently, these are several calculations on economics when the corporations are advancing SDGs. So, and we believe like such economics has the longer scopes, trust much longer than the economics to make one nation make great again. So this is an example. Let's see that some of the data in the CDP. Yeah, we analyzed 89% of the companies already have the targets in place to reduce their emission. That's up from the 85% last year. The big shift we can see is more companies set the longer emission target. 68% of the companies are now looking to the 2020 or beyond, and 20% of companies had a target to 2030 or beyond, so up from the 14% last year. More companies setting target for 2020 or 2030 or even like a 2050. So particularly after Paris Agreement, the trend become more common. Science-based target, another like the sign to really show that the long-term target setting and that become a standard business practice. It's a part of women business initiatives. This is a vital tool to achieve the Paris Agreement, which can be a clear message to the investor. So now almost 500 companies committed to SBT, and target of the 150 companies have been 151 actually, but approved so far. And actually both number is really increasing day by day. So many corporations now setting up ambitious long-term target to reduce emission in order to achieve zero emission world. And life cycle analysis, we know that there's more room to reduce emission in supply chain. So best practicing company share these SBT target with suppliers. We have seen that these cascading effect in many cases. More suppliers become, also a supplier become interested in setting up longer term targets and SBT. Page 9 shows that the movement of the other key factors. We see 7% of the companies setting target on renewable energy production, and 19% set up the target on renewable energy consumption side in 2017, slightly up from the previous year anyway. And yeah, this year I think that the number consumption side will be have a big jump, judging from the expansion of the RE100 initiative. This year's CDP result will come in January. Also, internal carbon pricing is one of the key tools to introduce sustainable economics in climate change. Already 32% are reporting carbon pricing setting and expecting more in this year. Also, like the light side, let's say, yeah, reporting about the more category in the scope 3 is increasing. That's a good sign. And let's see that the RE100 project. RE100 is an initiative to chase 100% usage of renewable energy. And now more than 150 companies have joined, and the number is increasing day by day, actually. RE100 is one of the key initiatives of the women business again. Apple and Microsoft have already achieved almost 100% renewable energy, and while other participants are setting up such target for 2020 to a longer one in 2050. And right side of this the page, it shows that the number of the company who are actively sourcing renewable energy electricity in major countries. So US and Japan is the numbers higher, and the percentage of the company who are like mentioning the usage of the renewable electricity. So in summary, a trend seen in a response to the CDP in the climate change, like to say highly influenced by the recommendation from TCFD, the one I mentioned, like a task force on the climate-related financial disclosure, which fully represent the global investors' interest. So these are like a governance strategy, risk management. These are actually the basic for the disclosure, and the sector-specific approach also like very important because impacts and solution are different in each sector. So having more like a sector-specific analysis, and scenario analysis also important in long-term strategy. So setting up some scenario when you have a strategy. Integration with the financial report, that's another like a way we can see. So identify the climate-related risk and opportunity, and evaluate this impact in the financial report required. Introduction of internal carbon pricing, as we see, like a 32% is now company introduced, but that's vital to establish sustainable economics in the climate-related economic model. And another trend, like a long-term target setting, that's we have seen. So setting up a long-term target, science-based target, or these are vital to reach zero carbon world in 2050. And also like cascading effect in the supply chain is another important trend. So greenhouse gas emission generated in supply chain is, in general, we say like 4 times as much higher than the company's scope 1 and scope 2. So best practices supply chain members such as Walmart, L'Oreal, share the SBT target and the key performance indexes with their supplier and chase zero carbon world toward 2050. So these are like a scene in the climate change side. I really prepared the 2 more slides for the water. It's this water and but yeah, and also like the forest. But these are like, I don't go to the detail. But compared to the climate change, trends are not very clear yet in the water and the forest. But we can see the more companies are having more concerns in these areas too, and engage in the target setting and considering the supply chain management. So please take a look when you have time. But so yeah, I'd like to finish my presentation here. Thank you very much.
So we will share the slides. I know it's quite detailed, but what we're trying to show you is that industry is essentially already on the job on SDGs, and partly because there's a lot of money in it and a lot of profitability to be made. And we have a final presentation now from Professor Hiroshi Ueda, who will talk to you about the perspective of a chemical industry and what a chemical industry is doing to try and reach the 2% target. So over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for giving me this valuable opportunity to speak with you today. I'd like to talk about the role of the chemical sector in advancing the SDGs, implications for the 2-degree goals. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Okay. First, let me briefly introduce the business areas we have at Sumitomo Chemical. We have several broad business areas, including petrochemicals and plastics, and energy and functional materials, and IT-related chemicals, also health and crop sciences, and pharmaceuticals. As a diversified chemical company, we've created and supplied many kinds of innovative products to a wide range of industries. Next, I'd like to share the highlight the chemical industry's experiences and efforts in the past. For example, in Japan, we confronted with serious environmental problems in the past, such as pollutions and resources and energy issues. The Japanese chemical industry has overcome such problems through making environmental protection efforts and supplying innovative materials to the market. Now, as global scale issue pile up, including the response to global warming and the creation of a circular economy, we believe that the chemical industry can deliver solutions to these issues and the SDGs. Now, I'd like to take up the response to global warming and as an imminent issue that we should tackle collaboratively. As you are aware, at COP21 in 2015, the Paris Agreement was adopted. World communities show their strong shared sense of crisis on the issue of global warming, and under the Paris Agreement, the 2-degree goal, which focused on containing an increase in the average global temperature to less than 2 degrees as compared with the pre-industrial revolution level, was set and agreed upon. However, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve the 2-degree goal if each country implements only the actions they submitted at the COP21 as NDC, nationally determined contribution. This is the IEA's 2050 CO2 emission reduction scenario, which illustrated CO2 emissions by category and reduction goals. The upper blue line focused CO2 emissions with no reduction efforts, while the lower red line illustrated the emission level needed to achieve the 2-degree goals. In order to achieve the 2-degree goal, it is necessary to achieve a substantial reduction of CO2 in every sector. To realize this goal, driving innovation is indispensable. Next, let me pick up the area of transportation as one innovation case. Sumitomo Chemical is not an automobile company, but we provide various materials for automobile companies. In the transportation area, the increase in use of electric vehicles is a key to CO2 reduction. To achieve an increase in the use of electric vehicles, we need enhanced battery performance, lighter auto body parts, enhanced energy density in batteries. All of these are vital to the successful increase in use of electric vehicles and contribute to CO2 reduction. As a solution for enhancing battery performance, I'd like to introduce Sumitomo Chemical's product for electric vehicles known as lithium-ion secondary battery perovskite separators. With the rapid growth in sales of electric vehicles, the demand for lithium-ion secondary batteries is also growing rapidly. Because the contact between an anode and a cathode, otherwise known as a short, can cause a fire, and innovative materials that can ensure the safety of lithium-ion batteries is desperately needed. So I'd like to introduce you to our perovskite separators, which increase heat resistance of lithium-ion secondary batteries by coating polyolefin film with aramid resin using a proprietary technology. This innovation contributes directly and positively to the increase in use of electric vehicles and greenhouse gas reduction. We are currently continuing the research and development on making our perovskite separator thinner so as to increase the capacity of lithium-ion secondary batteries. I would also like to introduce the concept of carbon life cycle analysis, or CLCA. This concept has been advocated by ICCA, International Council of Chemical Association, a worldwide association of the chemical industries. It describes the entire life cycle of CO2 emitted at each stage of the process, from raw material mining to the manufacturing, distribution, consumption, use, recycling, disposal, and incineration. Let's compare two CLCA examples. One using comparative products and the other using innovative products. In doing so, we find it interesting to note that substantial reduction of CO2 is confirmed in case of using innovative products through a product's entire life cycle, compared with the use of comparative products. We call this reduction avoided CO2 emission. We understand that the chemical industry can play a greater role in reducing CO2 emissions by delivering innovative products to the market. Before I conclude, let us share a future vision. A carbon cycle society. As you are fully aware, to realize the carbon cycle shown on the screen, many studies and demonstration experiments are needed, including CO2 capturing or CO2 conversion and producing fuels or a chemical using CO2 as a raw material. These studies are currently being implemented, allowing us to predict a new frontier for the chemical industry in the area. To achieve the 2-degree goals and a smooth transition to a carbon cycle society, supply chains and social infrastructure that fit a carbon cycle society need to be created, and our lifestyles need to be changed through collaboration with industry, government, and academia. I believe the chemical industry would like to play a positive role in advancing the agenda by bringing innovative products to the world, and thus contributing to the SDGs realization. I sincerely hope that this session can serve as an excellent occasion for further dialogue and collaboration. Thank you.
So I just invite the panel up. Just take the 4 seats. So thanks for staying with us. Now we can get down to some discussion. So as I said at the outset, the purpose of this session is to look at the whole concept of, should industry be involved in policy making? Should it be shunned? What do we think about industry when it comes to INGSA and the policy making community as a whole? And secondly, to give some basic case studies about what industry is doing right here, right now on the SDGs. So I want people now to get involved. We have some roaming microphones. Give me 2 here for the panel. So guys, you can share these. So who, just as a straw poll, hands up, who is actually working for industry or has ever worked in industry in their lives in the past? Hands up. Literally less than 10 people. That's kind of interesting. See, and most people then are working, I presume, in academia or working in government. Okay. So who would like to ask the first question? Don't be shy. Yes, this gentleman over here. Don't forget to say who you are and where you're from. And usually a question starts low, rises at the end, and is short. So.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Haikal from the Academy of Sciences, Malaysia. I wanted to ask with regards to SMEs, small, medium enterprises. They make the bulk of any industry. How can SMEs embark on their journey of addressing the SDGs, especially when if a SME were to survive, they mainly focus on their bottom line. So what is the low-hanging fruit for them in order to embark on this journey of addressing sustainability? And is collaboration the key in terms of like addressing the sustainability within their core business? That's my question.
Okay, who wants to take that one? Royston, you want to take it?
So I would look at 3 specific areas. One is supply chain. I think as large corporates decide that the SDGs is their way forward and they want to collaborate for that, you see therefore the need for them to work through their supply chain and SMEs tend to be feeders into the supply chain, either on the supply side or in the distribution side. So the ability for the SDGs to really benefit SMEs is tremendous. The other one is in terms of what we talk about the sandbox approach and innovation. We see a lot of innovation now coming into startups on the SDGs. So the ability for SMEs or to say, let's experiment with an SDG, let's see what we can build as a business model around that, and then bring it into a sandbox to be able to try out different models, again, is very interesting. And then you can have angel investors and others that come in along with that. And finally, the ability to look at collaborating and creating a financing product. Today we've talked about social impact bonds. Is there a way to come together and do, say, a multi-originator pool where we can create a single financial product, given my investment banking hat? How do we create funding mechanisms? Because one of the biggest challenges for SMEs as we go into an uncertain world over the next 24 months is where's the funding coming from? So A, where did the funding come from? How does the innovation get funded? And how do you plug into the supply chain? I think are three ways where SMEs can play.
Anyone else in the panel with a comment? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just repeated the same things as Leighton said, but yes, as I mentioned in CDP, now we have like two programs. So one is from the investor scheme, and the other one, I said, the supply chain. And that's really try to involve more company in SM, including SME. And as I mentioned, it's now that we received more like a response from the supplier side, and that's really including the SME. And yeah, that's so try to really encourage them based on the like a necessity from the big procurer, and that's the things that we're doing. And as I said, like disclosure is the start of everything. So just disclosing, not necessarily to advancing the SDG, but once you disclose, the journey start. So SME should be involved in the journey to the SBT setting, and then like involved in this kind of cycle, I believe.
Okay, we go to a second question. This lady here in the front.
Thank you very much. It was very inspiring. My name is Michiko Izuka. I'm from GRIPS. I have several questions, but if I may just say one, I think one is this, from the private sector, what do you expect from the network like INGSA and from the academia on overall? I mean, what do your expectations? Because it seems that you have your all plans, but it doesn't seem to have any involvement in the academia.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is that what we've seen inside INGSA is that basically industry is perceived as having too many conflicts of interest and is very often shunned. So for example, at the WHO, if you want to tackle obesity, you're actually not allowed to engage with anybody who's making sugar. So at the European Commission, for example, if you work for industry, you cannot be on an expert panel. So these are kind of crazinesses that we look at, and we look at how you can get around these constraints, transparency and so on, and engage industry a little bit more. So it's a very good question. So I don't know if we have a policymaker in the audience. Is there anybody who's actually on the other side engaging with industry? Do we have anybody today? Nobody. So maybe
I have one for science.
Yeah, go back to the panel.
So I want to go back to the 5 INGSA, and I think for each one there's a role that science and technology and research can play. On the impact investing side, can we create enough of AI and machine learning to be able to look at the data that's coming out of impact investing and create really a tool for financing the SDGs? On the end of leaving no one behind, is there a way to create really customer-centric design? And I think again to the SME question earlier, are we designing top-down all the time with a middle section in mind or with the rich customer in mind? And who's really designing with the bottom of the pyramid in mind? And again, there's a role that science and technology can play there. In the G, I think it's particularly important. How do you frame government policy? Where is research supporting that policy that is truly inclusive? On the S, again, in terms of systemic change, where is policy driving its systemic change from? And finally, on the authenticity, who is measuring that impact? Because if we are not measuring, then it's just a talk shop and we're just sort of spouting jargon. But is someone really measuring? And the role of science, of technology, of data is to be able to really support the ways forward.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Question. I'm now CTO of Sumitomo Chemical. So we spend $1.5 billion per year for R&D. So we investigate some technical issues, but it's a wrong way to achieve the goals, so SDG goal for the society contribution product, it's a long way. So through the way, we need many collaboration with each other expertise people. For example, we are a chemical industry, but we need sometimes social expertise or other political knowledge. So we essentially want to connect or communicate, and really want to network many kinds of people.
You said you had another question. Do you want to ask one more? While you have the mic.
No, well, let's see. I think my other question sort of addressed to the indicator that you just raised, because because you were talking about impact, and the impact is immensely difficult to measure. And I was wondering whether you have any idea how this might be possible.
It's there is a specific tool that we've developed at Grameen Foundation. It's called the PPI. It's called the Progress Out of Poverty Index. And it's actually an impact measurement tool, and there are quite a few others. There is the GEARS tool, there is the Cyrille tool in Europe. So there are very specific tools to be able to actually measure. What we do with the Progress Out of Poverty Index is actually measure a household before an intervention and then a period later, and see, has the household moved out of poverty, or sometimes if you've done a microfinance loan but you've done it badly, they actually can go further into poverty because you give them so much money that they're unable to manage it, and then they get further into debt. So the ability for us to not stop at saying we've developed a product and give it out because that's designed for the poor, but to follow that up with measurement is extremely critical. So people shy away from talking about measurement, but I think that's absolutely critical, so I'm glad you asked that question. And really it's a role for people in the academia, for science, for technology to come up and say, how do we measure? And to my mind, if we can use blockchain in some ways, to be able to really shift the paradigm and say, how do I measure a farmer's productivity? How do I make sure that the middleman is not chipping him? How do I make sure that the wastage of agricultural produce is not happening? And find technology that's doing traceability all the way down the chain and create that, and it could be a silly idea, but I genuinely want to create a blockchain-based agricultural tool to track and traceability of agricultural products.
Okay, let's take a few more quick questions. The gentleman beside, did you have a question?
Klaus Simmons from the World Bank. I have two questions. The first one is 2019 is sort of the first year of stock taking of how far we have gotten with the SDGs. So presumably this gives us an opportunity to actually change some of the orientations. And I guess from a private sector point of view, what would be some of the necessary adjustments in the way we think and we manage and implement the SDGs going forward? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question, yesterday we talked a lot about SDI for SDG roadmaps, country roadmaps, because in some way, certainly that's my advocacy, is we need to take this down to a country level. And I guess my question to you is, to what extent would you be willing to actually participate in some of these country level discussions? Because it's one thing to have academia and policymakers and international organizations participate in the process. What is completely lacking is a real clear participation on the part of the private sector. And I think we're not going to get very far, at least that's my view, without private sector participation.
Okay, we'll take another couple of quick questions and come back. Who else would like to ask a question? This gentleman over here.
Thank you. If I can come back to Royston, our sense is that there's a great deal of innovation and enterprise that is available in bottom of the pyramid communities, certainly where I live in South Africa. but at the same time we have an extremely conservative banking sector. And I wonder what lessons Grameen could offer for how a banking sector in South Africa could understand sustainable banking in a different way based on your experience of being able to do things differently.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes, this gentleman here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think mine too is just a build up to what he just said. Given the traditional premise of profit-oriented nature of businesses, what do you think is the key driving force of businesses towards the SDG?
And where are you from, sir?
I'm University of Sheffield, PhD student.
Okay. So maybe we'll get Cyrille to take that one first, the profitability of industry. So I have a question for you as well, sir. You said that airline traffic will double every 15 years. So by 2050, that's a 400% increase, for example. But you said airlines today are just 2%. So by my maths, that's actually with a 50% reduction, a 200% increase to 4%. So can you tell us what you're doing on the profitability side and vis-a-vis the SDG side? Could you tackle that question for that gentleman with more specifics from the airline industry?
Well, first, for the technology part of it, SDG, how we reduce it, like you did the math correctly. Huh? This is why the target of carbon neutral growth by 2020 is already quite a challenge, because they will be increased, and at the same time you want to reduce your emission. But we are doing, I was explaining, there is not one single solution. There is technology, how you improve your technology and you make sure that everything is going to happen. There is integration in international bodies, and kind of answer also what we expect industry from a group like INGSA. We've been working with ICAO on the topic, and what we enjoy is having one international body that is defining the policies, that is very clear for all the actors in the industry, what they are supposed to do for 2050, and you imagine the amount of money that is behind it to do a proper roadmap and to invest when you're a CTO to make your technology plan and ensure that you're not going to waste money in something that in 10 years from now will be out of the policy. So clarity and helping to integrate. The more we evolve, the more complex it's going to be, the more technologies are going to synergize together. And the transversality aspect of it, policy, social science, technology, urban planning, everything all together, one shop stop center, if you want, on what is going to be the policy, how we can move towards the beautiful picture I was showing at the beginning, what could be the cities, the sustainable cities in 30 years, 50 years from now. So this is one thing. For the profitability, we are doing this because we need to be, the aviation industry need to be here in 20 years from now. The whole model of the economy in the world today is relying on the possibility of exchanging between the different communities, the different parts of the world. We need this transportation industry in the future, and to make it happen, you need to have this sustainability goal, and it's as simple as that. The profitability is here for the whole economy, and then for the transportation industry itself, it's a matter of life and death. So.
And just a question on the airline industry. Does Airbus take a stance, say, with the airline companies? For example, in Europe, if your car is more than 10 years old, you can't drive it in a major city, you can't have diesel and so on. Do you get involved when, say, a Western country is selling its old planes that are really polluting to, say, the developing world? So sometimes we all fly, we get in a plane, we know it wouldn't exist in Europe, but it still exists maybe in the developing world. So does the airline take a position on these things?
So Airbus is not taking a position on this one.
Yeah.
Once we deliver the airplane, we have no say on it anymore. It's not our property anymore. For the airline industry, there is some rules. When the plane is fit to travel, it's fit to travel, and then there will be possibly more emission. This is
Okay.
I cannot comment on this one.
Okay, I know it's a tough question. Maybe I could ask Hiroshi, other than the chemical industry on the climate change, can you give us a couple of examples of what you're doing in other areas, like plastics in the sea, recycling, and so on?
Especially recycling.
Yeah.
the plastic waste problem recently is a king everyone. So these are imminent issues the chemical industry should tackle. Plastic are, as you know, essential material that contribute to energy savings and reducing food losses. But widely used in our daily lives. But it's a waste problem. Our company effort has a limitation. I think the issue should be widely discussed for solution throughout the chemical sector and the overall value chain. So we'd like to proactively tackle on this problem with the other stakeholder or society.
Okay. Ken, maybe I could ask you to take the World Bank question about the country by country level. What we kind of got an inference was that industry is seen to be a little bit lame in disclosing its research methods, its findings, its results. At the same time, you have to stay competitive, a little bit secretive. Industry has to have hierarchy and so on. So how does your kind of work, the reporting, the database work, how do you break it down country by country, and how do you feed it back into the SDG world itself? But is there not an inherent danger that if you allow investors to decide which SDG they want to invest in, that SDGs get left behind, and that the market ultimately will, distort the achievement of the goals? And as we see with technology, we're barely transferring third industrial revolution technology to the developing world while we're inventing our fourth industrial revolution technology. How can you guarantee that basically every country at some level is reaching a bare minimum of reaching targets? Yeah.
So it sounds like investor really determine that kind of portfolio in our work, but of course, not only the investor can determine the work, but probably the world That's probably the most, yeah, only the things we can say. I don't know how we can really create the better portfolio in SDGs.
Okay. Royston, on the South African banking question, I mean, do you know enough?
Hello, yeah. So let me, if you don't mind, just let me go to the 2019 and stock taking question. I thought that was spot on. For me, I think there's a great positivity and hope that SDG is something that people are now talking about. I would like to see a focus move away from the SDGs, and I'm being not politically correct or cute, but I would like to see a focus on the 169 indicators. I think we could get trapped at the SDG level and then just sort of talk motherhood and apple pie without being very, very specific on the granular indicators. So I do want to see in the next 24 months people held up to the 169 and get serious about that. Otherwise, we will get nowhere. The other one is so I was speaking at the UN General Assembly with Achim Steiner and Jeffrey Sachs, and one of the things we're saying, and you said, how would corporates want to be part of that in the countries? And to my mind, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So companies have no choice. I think it's important for the private sector, and governments have no choice either to think that they can do it alone. So it has to be in concert and get done. To the question from Cape Town, which is one of my favorite cities in the world, I do believe that there are genuine economic models that can work if people have the will to do it. I've seen that in Bangladesh, where the Grameen Bank started. I've seen that in India, where 10 years ago we had 55% exclusion from formal financial systems, and today it's 99% inclusion. We have, as I said, 30 million clients, and that's how the microfinance sector has stepped in. I do want to point out, however, with technology, there is an even greater opportunity now through crowdfunding. I think we can democratize funding access. I think we can use platforms to be able to allow people from across the world to say, this is a lady in Kinshasa who's got a store, she needs $200. Can you put it online? Can people decide whether they want to donate or whether they want to lend, and create a model to field partners of microfinance institutions across the world today, which we have, and say, how do we reach that last mile with funding, very, very, very specific, very measurable funding to be able to meet that goal. And finally, the question from my friend on how do we make sure corporates are part of this. And to my mind, CSR is no more corporate social responsibility, it's corporate survival responsibility. You cannot survive as a corporate if you are not part of wanting to build a sustainable planet.
Okay, so we have to wrap up here. Just to wrap up, I just ask each of you, what would you want the policymaker to do? Just what's the biggest problem you have right now with global regulation or policy making that you'd like to get across to kind of an INGSA crowd? Maybe start with you, Cyrille.
But like I was saying, I will repeat what I was saying. If we have a one-stop shop sort of organization helping us to understand what would be the policies in the world, cross-dimensional, not only in one type of science, but social science, policy, urban development, everything. This is something we are looking for. Just to add something on top of it, because I cannot only say twice the same thing. I will go back to the point on SMEs and what we were saying. When there is policies, SDG is not only a coercive thing, it's not only trying to put boundaries on business, it's also creating new opportunities of business for SMEs in particular. Suppose you have a new policy, you want to monitor pollution for agriculture, you need to set up some sort of ecosystem of people who will be able to check using technologies, is the policy properly implemented, and this is a business opportunity. So it's not going to be for Airbus, but it's going to be for the general business ecosystem. It's why we need to be part of it.
Okay. Royston?
It's a challenge, actually. How do we act? I think moving from conversations and dialogue and conferences to action, I can see Grant in the room. How do we make sure that we say at the next INGSA conference, we announce a specific action that we decide on in the next 2 hours? We say, let's take a project coming out of this INGSA event and put it in place. Let's do a pilot in the words of what Michael from Australia was talking yesterday, and do something that we can demonstrate that policy and science and technology can work together with private sector and demonstrate how something has moved even if it's a little, but it's a movement forward.
So we're lacking case studies, basically.
Okay, we are as a private sector concentrated to develop new technology. So I want to the policy maker. Next year, June, G20 will be held in Osaka, Japan. So I really want to show the government, show the leadership in the SDGs viewpoint in such a worldwide Congress.
Finally, Ken.
Yes, probably, yes, emphasize that again, like how to introduce the economics into this world. As Royston mentioned, that's compared to MDGs, SDGs are more like a commercial factors and then cooperation coming. And same things happen compared to the Kyoto Protocol. It's probably the Paris Agreement, more like the cooperation is a key member. But as we discussed, yeah, so the policymakers should really organize the circumstance to really more smooth introduction of this economics into this sustainable world. And so one thing back to the previous question, so yes, investors, don't forget, they are also working in the private sector. So they have their agenda in commerce. So probably if investor really forget a certain part of the SDGs, the public sector should really cover this kind of area. That's probably, if we really try to keep the SDGs overall, public sector should really pay attention, and some of the big the funds really concentrate in certain part of normally the commercial reason. That's kind of things have to really public sector's role to really watch.
So thank you, all four of you. It was very, very interesting. There's a coffee break now, and we will come back. We will come back with some planning for INGSA for going forward as well, and maybe having more industry people on panels. And definitely, we promise you the next time some gender balance, because I know we have 4 men from industry, and we couldn't get a lady from industry, which was interesting enough. So thank you all for staying, and enjoy the conference.